You thought I was going to run this amplifier at 5 kilowatts? Hell no. There are some things you learn very quickly in Australian amateur radio. Never bring up politics on 80 metres. Never suggest FT8 might actually count. And never, ever ask why someone's 400-watt station is dimming the lights 3 streets away. So today, we're talking about the Aussie 400-watt legal limit. And yes, the title is the ACMA are gonna come after me for this. Not literally, I hope. I don't need a white van parked outside the house with men in black wearing sunglasses, holding a field strength meter, a spectrum analyzer, and scaring the neighbours. But this is one of those subjects where everyone has an opinion, everyone has a story, and everyone knows someone, usually a mate of a mate, who is definitely, absolutely, positively only running 400 watts. Even though his signal is bending the ionosphere into the shape of a pretzel. Now, let's get the boring, responsible part out of the way first. In Australia, advanced amateurs are still limited to 400 watts peak envelope power on SSB. That's the legal limit. This video is not me telling anyone to break the law. There. That should keep the lawyers, the regulator, and the professionally offended happy for at least the next 5 minutes. So with that, why are we still stuck at 400 watts? Because for years, Australian amateurs have been asking for 1 kilowatt. Not 10 kilowatts, not a Radio Australia transmitter feeding a curtain array in the backyard, just 1 kilowatt. ACMA has allowed higher power in very limited circumstances. There actually was a high power trial back in 2012 and 2013. Some advanced amateurs were allowed to run up to 1 kilowatt. But ACMA then looked at the results and they basically said, nope, we're not continuing this. One of the reasons given was around RF exposure awareness, and whether amateurs had demonstrated enough understanding of the rules. Which, let's be honest, is not completely unfair, because some hams will build a 160mm vertical out of fencing wire, roofing screws, blind optimism, and 3 decades of unresolved personality issues. And then they'll get offended when someone asks whether they've done an RF safety assessment. But that was more than a decade ago. The hobby has changed, equipment has evolved, and the world has moved on. New Zealand has had 1 kilowatt since 2011. New Zealand, just across the Tasman. A country with too many sheep, mountains, earthquakes, and a national rugby team that terrifies grown men. Yet, apparently the thing they're not scared of is a properly qualified amateur running 1 kilowatt. The United Kingdom now allows 4 licensees to run up to 1 kilowatt on primary amateur bands. The United States allows up to 1500 watts. America has had 1500 watts for decades. And this is the same amateur service that gave you 75 metres after dark, where grown men with big linears and blood pressure medication spend hours warning about government surveillance, while voluntarily broadcasting their name, call sign, location, and medical history to half the continent. And Canada. Canada lets qualified amateurs run even more than that on SSB. So here in Australia, we're still running 400 watts like it was personally engraved on the stone tablet by Sir Robert Menzies. And that's the bit people overseas don't get. Because when Australian amateurs ask for 1 kilowatt, this is not some wild, reckless frontier town proposal. It's a moderate, internationally acceptable power level that already exists in comparable countries. And yes, I already know what someone is typing in the comments.
Power doesn't make you a better operator.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. A kilowatt into a terrible antenna is still a terrible station. It's just a terrible station now that makes a neighbour's toaster speak fluent Aussie bogan. But power does matter, whether you like to admit it or not. It matters when Australian amateurs are trying to compete with stations overseas who are legally running more power than we are. And Australia is not exactly a small, RF-friendly backyard. We're a long way from everywhere. On HF, sometimes you just need more grunt. And sometimes, yes, another few dB can mean the difference between getting a message through. Going from 400 watts to 1 kilowatt is only about 4 dB. That's not a broadcast transmitter. It's not Radio Australia returns from the dead and wipes out every baby monitor in the Southern Hemisphere. It's less than one traditional S-unit. But it is enough to matter when you're trying to work the world from Australia instead of launching your signal into the ionosphere and hoping someone somewhere feels a disturbance in the force. Right, technical bit over, back to the important stuff. Sheds, secrecy, and mild criminality. Because the 400-watt limit has become a bit like Prohibition in America in the 1920s. The law says one thing, the culture says another, and somewhere in the middle, there's a bloke in the shed saying, "No, officer, this is medicinal bourbon." And that's the uncomfortable part of this debate. Because you see, when a rule is seen as outdated, it doesn't make people more responsible. It teaches them to become quiet, careful, and selective about what they admit. And that's bad for everyone. It's bad for you, ACMA, because it encourages quiet non-compliance. It's bad for responsible amateurs because they're stuck doing the right thing while others get the advantage. And it's bad for the hobby because instead of having a mature conversation about power, safety, interference, station engineering, and accountability, we all end up whispering like we're discussing bootleg gin behind the speakeasy. And no, this is not a call to break the rules. It's the opposite. It's a call to bring the rules closer to reality. Because when the law makes sense, people are more likely to respect it. And when it doesn't, you end up with prohibition. But instead of hidden whiskey barrels, it's hidden ACOMs, OMs, and the Miratrons, and maybe the odd broadcast transmitter or two. I really wonder what happened to those Radio Australia transmitters. And instead of the police raiding a speakeasy, it's the ACMA trying to work out why someone on 40 metres is 30 over 9 from a suburb that normally can't even get mobile reception. So, ACMA, stop pretending 400 watts is some magical safety line handed down from Mount Bureaucracy, because it isn't. It's a policy setting, and policy settings can change. Australia is not exactly short on evidence. New Zealand had this figured out since 2011. The UK is on board. The Americans have been there since before some of you were licensed. Even Canada is out there doing 2.25 kilowatts like it's nothing. This is not us asking for something radical. This is us asking to catch up. Look, I know amateur radio politics is about as relaxing as being one run short, one wicket left, and realising the bloke walking out to bat is Glenn McGrath. But if Australian amateurs actually want change, then sitting on Facebook complaining about the WIA, RASA, the old guard, the new guard, or whatever happened at Wyong back in 2004 that apparently nobody's allowed to talk about, is just not gonna get it done. We need serious representation. This means getting behind RASA, it means getting behind the WIA, and yes, I said both, because this is bigger than internal hobby politics. If both organisations are pushing in the same direction, making evidence-based arguments, then the case becomes much harder to ignore. But if the amateur community presents as fractured, cranky, and allergic to paperwork, then the ACMA will do what regulators do best. Nothing. And to be fair, from their point of view, doing nothing is safe. No one in Canberra gets promoted for saying, "Great news, Minister. I've approved more radio hams to run larger amplifiers." The strongest case is not based on entitlement. It's based on evidence, international comparison, technical competence, and responsible regulation. Australia should not move to 1 kilowatt because amateurs are demanding a bigger number. It should move because the limit is increasingly hard to justify when comparable countries already manage higher power safely. Should Australian amateurs get 1 kilowatt? I think yes. Not because every VK amateur is sitting in the shed, dreaming of becoming Radio Australia's angrier cousin, broadcasting questionable opinions into Southeast Asia with a linear amp and a personality disorder, but rather because amateur radio is supposed to be about technical competence, and competent operators should be trusted with good equipment. It's time for a grown-up conversation, and if we want that conversation to go anywhere, we need to support the organisations actually making the case. Because if we leave this to random arguments on Facebook, we'll still be having the same debate in 2036. and probably with someone running 400 watts so hard their power meter has started asking difficult questions about the afterlife. I'm VK4KWM. This is Real Ham Radio.